In this video, I will go through how I get the best Wi-Fi I can at my property. And so this is for over 4 acres of land that I'm covering, including 4 different buildings. And I'm using a mesh system so all my devices seamlessly go across it. Now I've had an existing one here for about 6 years that I've actually brought from a older house, but it's a Asus AI mesh system. And I just converted that over to a TP-Link Omada setup. So let me just show you a little bit of what I will cover in this video here. I'm going to show you the layout of my property, about, like I said, 4 or 5 acres of Wi-Fi coverage. I'll go into details about my past Asus setup and what devices I had, how they worked. I'll go into what devices I bought for this TP-Link setup. I do have 3 different WANs hooked up to this TP-Link setup. That was actually one of my limitations before with the Asus. I couldn't do that. So I'm doing load balancing and failover. So I have 3 different ISPs, so hopefully my internet never goes down. And then I'll go into details of how I laid it out, how I get the internet to all these different buildings and whatnot, give you an idea of distances, obviously do speed tests and show you some demonstrations, heat maps for Wi-Fi coverage, a comparison between the Asus and the TP-Link setup, and then of course speed at all these different places throughout the property to give you an idea of how different these are. So let's hop right into it and show you what I have. Hey everyone, this is Nate and this is the Nader Tater channel. Alright, when we get done with this video, you're either going to think I'm really smart or I'm really dumb, because this is all the stuff I just purchased for my home Wi-Fi. Now I'm not going to do an unboxing and setup of all those details. Instead I'm going to explain why I bought this and does it actually work for a large property to have acres of Wi-Fi at your house that's blazing fast. So this is not really just for my home, I would say, because my home is actually only one of 4 buildings that this Wi-Fi is going to go to, and I'm going to try to cover acres of yard with this Wi-Fi. So existing Wi-Fi I have here is an Asus AI mesh system, and it actually does a half decent job of covering the spaces that I want, but I have some dead spots and I have some other limitations with that Asus setup. Additionally, that Asus setup is actually I think half or more than half of my routers that are involved in that setup are actually 10 years old or more, and so they're starting to show their age. They're AC, so they're Wi-Fi 5 protocol, and there's just some limitations that I'm running into. I'm having to restart the system more often, so I'm not getting as much reliability as I want out of it. Yada 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 is old, so I need to upgrade it, and instead of going to one of the current kind of consumer level or even prosumer level devices, I opted to go to this small business space here. And this is the TP-Link Omada setup. That's what majority of these products are here. There's a couple switches that I have above it. These are MoCRLink setups. I put all these products in the video description down below with links to Amazon or wherever that you can buy these. So you can go and check those out if you're interested in more details of them. But let me hit really high level what they're all about and what I'm going to use them for. And then of course the most important is, what do they do? You know, does this create a system that I can really use and leverage and do what I want it to? I will tell you that none of this is sponsored. I will admit that I have reached out to TP-Link to try to get some sponsorship, and I have not got it from them yet. So all this stuff I actually purchased with my own money, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to return it, and I'll let you know that in this video if it doesn't work well. As you can see, most of them are not unboxed yet. So what do I have here? So I have 4 of these indoor units. This indoor unit here is the EAP 670. And this 670 is big. That's one thing you'll notice here. So it's almost 10 inches, I think, in diameter. They have a EAP 610, which is much smaller. It almost looks like it's half the size, but I think it's like 6 inches. So it's technically, 3/5 the size. But that one has half the output power of this 670. This 670 also has a 2.5 gig Ethernet port. So those 2 factors, really the double the power output, was what said, yep, I'm definitely going with the bigger unit. And the fact that it's going to be on either a white ceiling for me, or perhaps it's going to be on a wall, but it's going to be kind of tucked in behind stuff. I already know where I'm going to place them all. I went with a bigger unit, and it also has the faster Wi-Fi protocol, so the AX5400, which means combining all of the 5 gigahertz and 2.4 gigahertz speeds, you get up to 5400 megabits per second. So moving to outdoor units, they have 5 of these now. So this is their EAP 650 outdoor unit, and so this is designed to be outdoors and to give you Wi-Fi over a wide area of the yard. This one is the AX3000 Wi-Fi speed, so that means it only has 3000 megabits per second total theoretical combined, but this is their best outdoor unit right now, at least on Wi-Fi 6 that they have. And this one I'm going to use outdoors, where I currently have some Wi-Fi point-to-point devices. So they look very similar to this, but they are kind of like a, not quite a laser beam, but it's a very focused beam, and it's designed to basically be, you can call it a replacement for Ethernet cable. And they're not designed and I'm set up so that I can't actually connect a device directly to them, but instead they just connect one Wi-Fi bridge to the other Wi-Fi bridge, and then on that other side I have another ASUS router hooked up in a different building. So this is going to replace that, or at least I hope it will, where I'm going to have this outdoor unit that I can connect directly to in the yard, so it's going to really help the yard coverage. And then I'll have another one of these at the building, so I'm going to treat them so that they will be a mesh setup, and they'll connect 2 outdoor units to each other without an Ethernet cable between them. But then all of the other units, like in the house, I have a hardline Ethernet between the switch, the main switch. There'll be power over Ethernet, so all I need is an Ethernet cable from the switch, because these devices will get their power from the Ethernet cable themselves, and that will be all set. So that's what I have here. And if we look at my property itself, I'll show you an overhead where I have the main house, I have a barn, there are some tennis courts, there's another barn behind those tennis courts, and if we look at the other direction, there's a pond, and there's a pond house down there. So that's all the space, and there's all yard between it that I want to cover. And the barn, I call it the barn, the main barn has hardline Ethernet from the house to it, but then the pond and the back barn has the Wi-Fi bridges on them, so there's no Ethernet to them. I'm using just the wireless signal to get the signal back there to them. Alright, as far as these boxes go, on the bottom here I have the hardware controller. And so for this Amada setup, you really want a hardware controller. You can technically have a software controller, but this allows you to configure everything in this controller. And when you connect a new device, or if you want to manage it, you can do, they call it kind of cloud-based, but it's really based off of, it's stored within this hardware, so you're connecting to this hardware when you're in like the Amada app. And that is going to allow me to configure all the settings, keep everything as one network, and even though I have all these different devices hooked up to it, it's going to act as one seamless system. If I put any kind of rules, they'll apply it across the board. So that's an important thing to have, so I have that. The next one up is another TP-Link product. I forget the model number, I'll have to look here. ER707M2. So that is the router that I have, and that one is a router that has multi-WAN capability. So I think can use up to 5 WAN connections, as well as the USB port can also be a WAN connection, kind of designed for the cellular stuff. And I do have multiple WANs, so I'm going to set up multiple WANs on here. And that's something I've had a problem with the Asus one. It seems to get pretty finicky as far as if I have 2 WANs set up, there are issues where it would crap out on me, or it would do some funky things with IP assignments actually from there. So I won't get into the details of what I was running into, but this hopefully I think will fix it. So this router also has at least 2 of the 2.5 gig ports, which means that it won't be the slowdown for any of these 2.5 gig capable indoor AP points. And then it does have a SFP port as well, but I will not be using that. I do not have fiber or any need for that on here. And then next here on this device I have a PoE switch. This is a MoCRLink switch, and this one is an 8-port switch. So this is how I'm going to get all of these access points powered without having to plug them into an outlet. They'll all get it from the Ethernet cable. And I'll need another one. This is just a smaller, I think it's a 5-port power over Ethernet, same kind of deal. And these are 2.5 gig capable switches here, and that's why I got them. I think the TP-Link one, they have lots of switches as well, but they did not have a lot of options for a 2.5 gig power over Ethernet switch, so I went with the MokerLink brand to get kind of exactly what I wanted without going to the 10 gig ones, which have a lot more cost and some other complexities as far as what kind of cable you need to run. The last two devices are also MokerLink, and this is just a very small, I guess they call it kind of a power over Ethernet splitter. So it goes from a single power over Ethernet. If you want to or need to, you can supplement it with power, but you don't actually have to. And then it comes out with 2 power over Ethernet. So I need that in a couple places around my property, where in my current setup with Asus, I have some of the devices daisy chained, and so I'll need to go from a single Ethernet cable like to my barn that does have Ethernet from the house, but then that actually has to go to both an indoor access point and an outdoor access point. And all of these access points here from TP-Link, and that's pretty common across the industry, they only have one Ethernet port on here. Now they do make some indoor, they call them like wall plate units, that do have 2 or 3 extra Ethernet ports, but both the form factor as well as the lower power output pushed me away from those in my use. But for a lot of people, those actually might be really good units to have instead of these big round kind of more ceiling based ones versus the wall plate ones. But this is what I decided to do, so let me go install this. I'll do some testing. Let's find out just how well it performs. Alright, so here is Google Earth, and this should just kind of give you a little bit of a 3D image so you can kind of orient yourself with what type of property it is. It is fairly flat land. The house is higher than, like, let's say the pond, probably by 15 or 20 feet. But otherwise it's fairly flat, but I do have some trees that block the signal for some of the yard, especially going towards the front of the house. But then on the side there's a large just grass yard that has no trees between the pond and all the way back to the tennis courts per se. Then you can see that there is a barn back there in between those trees by the tennis court, and then the last barn is in the back here, all the way in the very back there behind the tennis court. So that's another place. So from that back barn all the way up to the pond house down there, that's about 660 feet, I believe. So that gives you a rough idea of the scale. And then from the pond to the house is about, or from the pond house building to the garage on the house is about 225 feet. So that's roughly what I'm trying to cover with this Wi-Fi. Alright, so going into my previous setup, my Asus AI Mesh, on the left there are some of my devices that I had. So my main one was a RT-AC88U. That AC means it's a Wi-Fi 5 device, not a Wi-Fi 6 or 6E device. And I did have one more that wasn't shown on that screenshot that I had in the past, and that's the other little picture inlay, and that one is the RT-AX55. So that was a Wi-Fi 6 device, but I had 6 different routers that Asus allows you to make them basically nodes or mesh points, and I had those throughout my property. So that's what we'll use as my baseline or my comparison for the performance compared to this new TP-Link. There's lots of reasons why I switched from the Asus one. I won't really go into that fully, but let's look at the performance difference for sure. So in the TP-Link one on the right, you can see now I have currently plugged up about 8 of my access points. So that's for the indoor and for the outdoor. The 5th outdoor one I do plan on installing, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. But you can see what I have and kind of where they're at. For the most part, they're all placed exactly where the previous Asus ones are, and that's because I had Ethernet hardwired to ports, and so they made the most sense to kind of keep them where they were. I mentioned I do have 3 different ISPs hooked up right now. I actually have a couple more. A lot of my channel I cover cellular home internet, so you see AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon boxes here. Tons of videos on that if you want to see those on my channel. You can see that up there. Also, that's in my third floor loft. That's where my TP-Link Omada router is actually at, and that's because I wanted to have all the Ethernet ports from the gateways for the ISPs to go directly into that. I only had two Ethernet lines ran from there down to the basement. So in order for me to have more than two WAN ports, I needed to do that. So here's just another view of the topology, and this is with the built-in software that ASUS and TP-Link offer. And so on the left there, you can see the 88U was my main one, and then the green lines means that it was, I think, a 1 gig capable connection that's hardlined. So 3 of those were, 1 gig Ethernet connections, and then the orange ones were 100 megabit connections, and that's because both of those orange connections used a point-to-point Wi-Fi bridge, which only had 100 megabit per second Ethernet ports in them. So they were capped at that, and so it could tell that. So that's how they were set up. And then on the right, it's probably a little bit of an eye chart on the screen, but that's the TP-Link Omada setup. You can see I have the internet coming in to the router, and then you can see all the different devices there. It doesn't look like I can zoom in on here, but on the top right corner where it says Pond Outdoor, it actually tells you the link connection speed that it has, because that one is a Wi-Fi mesh connection back to the house or the deck outdoor unit. And so that one shows me it's 432 megabits per second for upload and 480 megabits per second download speed. And if we go back to the building 3 outdoor, so that's the back barn, and that one shows a 720 megabit per second speed. So those 2 outdoor units on the far right, those ones are connected by wireless, and so I actually replaced the point-to-point Wi-Fi bridges with these outdoor units. So let me look at a picture here. This maybe helps explain it a little bit better. And you can see the yellow boxes or yellow squares, those are the outdoor units. And you can see on the left side, the bottom left is what I'm calling building 3, and that goes to building 2, which is the barn there by the tennis courts. And so before, those 2 yellow boxes were a point-to-point Wi-Fi connection, and then I actually had another router, one of the ASUS AI mesh routers, inside that bottom left building. That building 3 had another router. So I actually got rid of devices by going to this Omada setup. And then you can see the red line there going from the house to building 2. That depicts an Ethernet cable that's buried underneath the ground to go to those. And then in the house itself, those 3 white circles are the indoor units, and they are all on different floors. So the green one is actually in the basement, the blue one is on the 2nd floor, and the orange one is on the main floor of the house. So basically one per floor, but location-wise, they're depicted correctly. They're not all in the center of the house. One is on one side, one's in the middle, and one's on the other side of the house. And then you can see the other yellow box there on the house. That's the outdoor unit that I call the deck outdoor because it's above the deck. And that one points down to the pond. And again, that one was a point-to-point Wi-Fi bridge in the past. And then I had another router inside the pond house. I now only have those outdoor units, and the outdoor unit is able to, send this Wi-Fi signal into the pond house. So that seems to be working okay. We'll see here in a second how it performs. And you can see here on the left, this is the difference between, it was actually a TP-Link point-to-point Wi-Fi bridge, which is a smaller unit, and then right beside it is the new EAP 650 outdoor unit that I replaced it with. So for me, it was fairly easy to replace it because I already had the Ethernet wired to the eave of the house, so underneath the roof there, and I already had a pole mount there, so I basically had to cut a couple zip ties off and then plug up the Ethernet cable and put zip ties back on to hold the outdoor unit in place. So it all went fairly quickly. So what's really interesting is on the right side of the screen, what I'm doing there is I'm connected to the pond house outdoor unit, and I'm looking at how it's getting uplink since it's a wireless mesh back to the house. There's no hardline Ethernet back to the house. It's shown at the top there that it's connected to the deck outdoor unit, which is the one closest to it. That makes a lot of sense. And it's about 225 feet away with a signal of minus 67 dBm, so pretty good signal, and pretty happy with that. But it's interesting to see that it actually picks up a lot of the other units. In fact, the blue one that I show there, building 3 outdoor, is depicted by the blue line in the overhead. That's 660 feet away. I'm a little confused by it because it does have a signal there of 72 dBm, but it's not a negative 72 dBm. So I'm not exactly sure what that means, or it also shows that there's 1 hop between it. So I don't know if it's doing something funny there, because I was kind of surprised that it picked up that device that far away, especially with the house in between them. Alright, but here's some examples of, before we get into the heat map, of exactly what type of speeds I'm getting. So the red arrow is us looking at the house, and that's the deck outdoor unit. I know you can't see it. I can't even see it on my screen, but it's on the side of the house, right at the soffit of the house. And then each of these test points are about 225 feet away. On the left side, I'm all the way down. You can see the picture there. I took the picture when I did the test. I was looking back up at the house, and I was getting 260 megabits per second of download, which is just under probably, or that's right around where my ISP speed is. So this means that I'm really not slowed down this far away from there. And the pings, if you aren't familiar with the cellular stuff, the pings are typically worse. So this is actually typical for the types of pings I would get at the house. So this is not inducing the lag or the pings there. And same thing on the right side. That's me actually down at the pond house, and you can see in the pond house picture, you can see the outdoor unit that I'm not hooked up to, but the red arrow is that same deck outdoor one that I'm connected to, and that one I'm getting 325 megabits per second down and 19 up. And again, that is the speed of my my internet connection, so I'm not limited actually by this Wi-Fi setup to get those speeds. We move back into the house now, and I used a software called NetSpot Plus. It's an app. It's 15 bucks. It's not bad. You know, there are many other ones out there. I opted to pay for this one, hoping it would be a little bit better. It's okay. I won't call it perfect. It does some funny things there. But on the left is the Asus AI Mesh setup, and on the right is the Amada. So this is the exact same, you know, device, and I'm trying to compare them as best I can back to back. I will admit it is not perfect by any means, but I think the general color scheme should give you a good idea. Basically, blue, the more blue it is bad, and the more red it is good. And so, you know, bright red means it's really good signal. Blue, I mean, you can get signal probably to what, about minus 90 or something dBm before you would disconnect and not get internet. But you can see here the Amada setup is much more consistent with being this orange and yellow color, and the places that are you know, on the bad end are the green ones, and they stay green all the way through the garage. And so green is still decent or still good. You know, I think the green is in like the minus 50s dB scale, so still really good signal. Versus the Asus AI Mesh, you can see I clearly have some blue spots in the house, especially in the garage, and that just you know, illustrates that it was not as consistent. This is with those blue circles are approximately where the access points are located for both of the setups. So it's the same 2 access points that it would kind of connect to. If I change that over to signal to noise ratio, this is another one to kind of look at. You really probably want your signal to noise to be above like 25 or so. And you can see with the TP-Link Amada, again, it's just a much more consistent trend there, where it is staying in this green to yellow phase, where the Asus AI Mesh, I was getting lower signal to noise ratings, where I was getting more blue in there. So not a huge difference, but that's the indoor. The outdoor is obviously the harder stuff to cover, because there's a lot of space. And here you can see on the top is the Amada, and then the bottom is the Asus AI Mesh setup. And again, it's the same color scheme and ratings there. So Obviously, there's a lot more blue colors that are out there, and especially the Asus AI Mesh. Those dark blue ones, effectively, my internet did not work there. My phone would either drop off of the connection, or it would try to connect and fail to connect. So you can see there that I had decent coverage, but I definitely had lots of dead zones in there. And then we'll show you next is the speeds also severely suffered versus this Amada setup. So the Amada setup, much more consistent. The whole back and side yard is all green for the most part. And this is where the app isn't perfect at the coloring. There are some kind of oddball colors thrown in there that I would say aren't quite representative. But the one thing that is true for the Amada setup is in the front of the house, there is kind of that blue area around the circle, and that is kind of a weaker zone, and that's where I want to put my fifth outdoor unit pointed towards the front of the house to actually improve that spot. And that I knew that might be a weakness, and it's because the access point that I have in that corner of the house is behind a lot of brick wall, and so that blocks a lot of the Wi-Fi signal from getting out in front. All right, and if we look at the same thing but with signal to noise ratio, it's the same kind of story. The Amada is just more consistent throughout and higher. If you look at it, it's about 10 dBm higher signal to noise than the Asus was. And if I look back at these numbers for the signal strength, where the little guy is placed there on the driveway, it was 11 dB, which is significant. I mean, if you know anything about the dB scale, I think roughly 3 dB is doubling the signal strength or power that you're receiving. So pretty substantial. All right, so let's look at a few speeds here for these different places. If you look at the house, I try to be fair to this. So where I put house/ISP, that's when I tested it. That's roughly what I was getting at the house. It obviously varies a lot, so you have to be a little bit careful. I wouldn't take these numbers as absolute, but instead take them as kind of relative to understand, hey, did it drop off a lot or did it not drop off a lot as you move to these different places. So just going into the garage, I lost basically half my download speed in the past, and that was in the middle of the garage. With the Amada setup, I really barely lost any of it. I lost maybe a little bit of download, but my upload was exactly the same. If I go to point A, which is on the picture, I've put those letters where I did the testing. So point A is kind of on my way down to the pond, and I would lose connection. And in fact, if I were kept going past A closer to the pond with the Asus setup, I would drop off Wi-Fi in that blue zone. I could not connect to it. But this just shows I went from 22 with the Asus up to 140. So I certainly dropped off with the Amada setup still, but maintain a lot better speed, and I stay connected going all the way down to the pond instead of it dropping off and having to reconnect. And then again, once you get down to the pond house, even though I did not have a Wi-Fi router set up inside the pond building, I just had the outdoor unit. Even so, I was still able to get faster speed inside the little pond house, which is actually a bad building for Wi-Fi because it has metal siding and some screen-in port stuff. So a lot of metal that tends to block the Wi-Fi. But it's still much better speeds there with the Amada setup. And then once I go out on the dock itself, again, better performance with the Amada. But that was my slowest area for the Amada setup, was getting out there on the pond. And I wasn't that far away from the outdoor unit, but the outdoor unit is kind of hidden by that building. I don't have good direct line of sight. So I might actually try to reposition the Amada outdoor unit down there at the pond to further improve the signal down there. For location D, that's up against the wood lines, I actually have like a nature trail that goes back in the woods. And that D point before was a very weak spot for the old Asus setup, where I was getting about 28 megabits per second download. Now I get 93 download and almost keeping my ISP upload there as well. Then point E is in the front of the house in the circle that, like I said, it gets blocked by a lot of the house features of the brick on the front. And so I was only getting about 4 megabits per second download with the Asus and 3 upload, and now that rocketed up to 118 for download and 13 for upload with the Amada setup, so big improvement on that one. And then we go to F, which is the backyard, and that is where I have a swing set. I was getting decent speed, 130 megabits per second down and 11 up with the ASUS setup, but now I'm getting effectively my full ISP speed right there in the backyard. No slowdown really at all. And then G is that far back building, and I was able to get okay speed. I do have like some cameras back there or some smart switches, so I needed Wi-Fi back there, and I had it before, but now I actually have fast, high-speed Wi-Fi going up from the 38 that it had before up to 154 megabits per second that I have now. So really big improvement. So far I've been very happy. I've had seamless roaming as I go through and walk the property. I don't have any kind of disconnects. So I'll do lots more videos out there on this. If you have specific questions, please do ask them in the comments below. I'll try to answer them. Or maybe I'll make a new video specifically on that topic if lots of people ask. So thanks for watching as always. Subscribe if you haven't already, and then I'll see you around.